So Dave, can you start off by just saying how you first became involved in environmental campaigning?
Well, it came from sort of childhood love of wildlife, and when I was 14, I think, I really wanted to get into photography, and I got an old Praktika, and which was a really old camera from the Eastern Bloc, and I used to photograph insects and things. That was largely because lenses were expensive, but putting a little bit of plastic between the lens you had and that was very cheap, and you could get really close to things. So I spent hours in odd places with lots of little flying insects around and all that sort of stuff. I went to Africa when I was 16 with the XYZ Club, which stood for the Exceptional Young Zoologist Club. It was part of the zoo. It cost 15 bob a year to be exceptional. So I did that. We went to Kenya and Tanzania for 2 or 3 weeks. 85 young people between the age of 14 and 18. They were going to do it regularly, but I think we caused such chaos that it never happened again. But I was introduced to Tsavo National Park and Ngorongoro Crater, and a bit of life too. 85 youngsters, and sort of down on your hands and knees looking through the floorboards of the place you were staying in, seeing the girls working down below. It was an eye-opener, but it also showed my love of wildlife. I got very excited about all of that, and then I did my degree in photography. Worked on the Isle of Rum doing some of that, which is a national nature reserve. And when I finished that, I saw an ad, somebody saying, want to walk across America for the World Wildlife Fund. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I got interested into that. And we set off in 1976. I returned in 78 from the US, and we didn't complete the whole thing. WWF at that time was tiny in the US. But it introduced me to the media, because we walked with a pack mule from Oregon into Wyoming, 1,500 miles, and we had a Union Jack on it, which was 1977, and people would stop us and ask us. So we'd go onto local television, we'd be interviewed by people, and I became the spokesperson for it. It sort of was good training ground. And then when I got back, I was approached through a friend by Alan.
So, who was Alan?
Alan Thornton was the director of Greenpeace at the time, and through a friend, he heard that I was a photographer, and I was asked to join the crew of the Rainbow Warrior. This was in 1979, anti-whaling campaign in Iceland, and that was the first time I met Alan, and we did all that. I found myself to be extremely seasick. But we did the campaign. We got arrested. Everything sort of went almost by plan, I suppose. And then I moved back to the UK and just got on with some photography and teaching photography and stuff. Until a few years later, again around a boat, which I said, I'm certainly not going on that. Said, no way, I'm not boats, simple as that. But we got involved in painting it and the crew and all that. This is where I met Jenny as well.
Sorry, Jenny?
Jenny Gibson, as she was then, Lonsdale now. And after a while, Alan kept saying to me, would you be a photographer? And I said, no, I'm not going on a boat, Alan. You know how I am. It's just not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And of course it did in the end. And we went to Norway, up in the Barents Sea in the Arctic Circle, to photograph, film and expose the minke whaling hunt up there, and to try and get them to stop using the cold harpoon and preferably stop killing them altogether. And that was where Jenny and I went ashore before the boat had arrived, so no one knew where we were from, and met people in the town, local town, which is a whaling town, fishing town, right up in the northern part of Norway, and found how open people were and how extraordinary it was to just be able to. I mean, we walked into the factory that was packing all the whale, and we talked to people on boats there about what it was like and where they went. It was a day of just gaining information and photographs, And it was in one day. Often I've found on trips you can pick up one day where it all happened, even though you might have been away 6 weeks. Obviously, lots of other things happened to get you there and afterwards, but often it's one day. And on this day, we got to know the director of the packing factory. He invited us to a party in the evening. We were there, and of course it's light all day because it was June, and at that time the sun never sets. So just everybody was busy and running around everywhere, and we were collecting information. And the boat came in the next day, and our cover was blown. But despite that, with our contacts in the packing factory, we were able to get the TV crew, the Dutch TV crew, in there because we knew the people there now. We parted with them, and it was the beginning of a few weeks of going around the Barents Sea and finally photographing as well and videoing and putting on TV the whaling and the killing of a whale, the cutting up of whales, the whole dirty, nasty process.
What was the reaction?
With the TV and the photographs that went in magazines and things, the TV went all over the world. The reaction was disgust at what was going on. This was after the whaling ban, so most of the world had stopped. Well, no, they hadn't quite stopped whaling, but there had been a whaling ban the year before, which wasn't in place till 4 years later. But the mood in the world was that whaling must stop, and so yeah, and it had a profound effect. I mean, they stopped using the cold harpoon. The 2,000 odd whales they were killing every year and was dropped by about 2/3, and then in the following years they looked at themselves more closely. It's never gone right up to there again, but sadly they're still doing it.
Was anyone else doing this sort of campaigning work at the time?
Well, of course, Greenpeace were doing anti-whaling with their boat, so on that side, but we didn't go there to put inflatables in front of the boat. We went there to document it and photograph it, put it on television, and find out what was going on. So I would say that although EIA hadn't been set up in 1983, that one day of investigation and then the visuals that we were getting from going out to the Barents Sea and all that was sort of the first investigation, but before the organisation was set up. And we found it was so useful. I mean, it was you have to understand that in the 70s, a lot of the new environmental movement was based on anti-whaling. And here we had in 1982 the decision to ban whaling internationally. And then in 1983 we're putting out pictures, graphic images, well, with a harpoon going into it, and small boats. So a minke whale, although it's not a large whale, it's a pretty big whale for a small boat. So sort of just a whale sort of right over the main body of the boat. So it was, yeah, visually horrible to people. They weren't used to seeing that. The magazines in that era would just pick up anything that had blood in it. And it was also the beginning, I guess, of a relationship with the media.
And then you went to the Faroe Islands. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, partly on the way back, a lot of discussion was had about the Faroe Islands, and there it was about the biggest whale killer in the world. I mean, and horrific, so cruel, and putting a gaff in the back of a whale and then dragging it along and cutting it with a knife, and it was just disgusting. So there was a lot of talk about we should go and do something about it. And in '84, Jenny and I went up there and stayed and travelled around. The thing about the Faroe Islands is you never know where there's going to be a whale kill, and there's bays all over the place. So you have to actually monitor the place. And the two of us just, I don't know how many thousands of kilometres we drove in our period up there, but we came across a whale kill. And at that time there wasn't anybody else from abroad complaining about it particularly, certainly not with the visuals, and I managed to get lots of pictures of the gaff going in, and I talk sadly about it all because the Faroe Islands is probably the one thing for me, and it was, I went there in '84, '85, '86 and '87 and saw whales and dolphins killed. And it affected me, in a profound, saddened way. It's the thing that comes up in nightmares. It's the thing that I can remember the squealing of a baby whale as it's being slaughtered in front of me, and I couldn't do anything because the guy had got his knife out on me. And taking photographs, I could do something. I could take a picture and I could sort of escape from it a bit, and I know I'm doing something and why I'm doing it. But when you can't and you watch it, it's just soul destroying, I guess, is what it was. But from that we got images which have been used again all over the world. The particular one that went everywhere. And what we did was we managed to get it syndicated, so it would go out, and so we saw it in Spanish and Italian and all over the world in magazines. And magazines sit on a table. It's not like TV that comes and goes and the next day everyone's moved on to something else. It sits there. So the photographs at that time were certainly very important. There was a picture of a child holding the fetus of a whale, and that's probably the picture from that year, besides the pictures of the sea just full of blood, but that picture seemed to get to people's hearts.
And how are you funding these trips and the filming and everything else?
Well, Alan was getting us help, basically. He was experienced in how to do such things. And we weren't, when you say funding, I mean, we weren't getting paid. It was all voluntary. It was just for the flights and the hotels and rental of a car. It was as simple as that. It was, I mean, the first 2 years when EIA had been set up, and this was still prior to that, EIA was set up after the first Faroes trip. For the first 2 years, I mean, I was working, and we were all working in our different areas. We weren't getting paid as part of EIA. We got some money in from some photo sales and that sort of thing, and the occasional small grants from people that cared and wanted to help that we knew, but yeah, it was a hand-to-mouth thing.
So following on from that, about a year and a bit later, Alan, you and Jenny decided to set up the Environmental Investigation Agency. Why that name?
Well, it was actually the same year. It was in the autumn of '84, which was the year that we first went to the Faroe Islands. I think it was a bit of a joke, the CIA. Investigation was the core of what we were doing. It was what made us different. I don't like it when people say, oh, you're the ones that just go and do the investigations, because we're not. The EIA is the ones that go and do the investigations to find out new information, new facts, and then campaign with it, and the campaign is what changes things. So that's what it was all about. But yeah, the name came at that time, sort of, let's do something. We hoped, actually, at that time, to get other organisations to take on the issue with our pictures, but no one looked particularly interested, so the EIA was set up.
And where was it? Where was the office? How many people? Just describe what it was like in those early days of setting up the
early days.
organisation.
Where was the office? It was an office, tiny office. Alan, Jenny, and I popping in and out because, of course, we were all working. And even a few years later, 85, 86, yeah, we had a friend, Nick Carter, who used to sit in the office quite often, who had expertise in pirate whaling and in the trade in wildlife and that sort of thing, which is how actually we sort of got into the bird trade work a bit later on. And that was it really to begin with. Then we got a secretary when the ivory work started, I think.
So just wind it back and explain how you decided which campaigns to work on.
Well, Norway I didn't decide at all, that was Alan, got the boat and all the stuff. The Faroes was because of a discussion on the boat. The bird trade stuff was partly because of Nick was there and had an expertise. We produced a report using his information and some pretty nasty pictures of birds being smuggled in tubes and all sorts of things on planes. Then we got some money from Christine Stevens' Animal Welfare Institute in Washington. Christine and her husband Roger were invaluable in the early days of EIA. Their support for us was amazing. They were a well-known, socially known couple in Washington, D.C. Roger actually got the Kennedy Center set up. I mean, he's part of that whole political and social structure there, or was. They both passed, unfortunately. Christine ran the Animal Welfare Institute out the basement in their house, but they knew people. And I remember if you ever turned up on an issue, I think Alan and I flew in once on our way to Japan, and we hadn't set up any meetings yet. And so we're having dinner with them, and Roger says, "Oh, I've got no meetings. I'll get you to see Senator Pell in the morning. He's the head of the Foreign Relations Committee." And so we went to see the senator in the morning, and he set things up through the American Embassy in Tokyo for us. So invaluable contacts. It's always like that. I mean, contacts and people you know, and they were a wonderful way into the US to try and get things happening there in the early days of EIA.
So you campaigned on the bird trade and then stopped. Why?
Well, you can't do everything basically, but we went on for many years. We campaigned right through, I was still going out there doing work in 94. So we went on from 86 to 94. But we campaigned and had some real successes. I mean, we gathered enormous amount of, the first one was 86. Christine helped us with that funding. And we went to Senegal. And Senegal was the biggest exporter of wild birds around the world for the pet trade. And so we went to find out what was happening. And we had, I think, a month, 3 of us, traveling around Senegal and Gambia. We actually came across something else in Gambia where primates were being taken illegally by the honorary French consul in Senegal and sent to labs in the UK and around Europe. So we had a story from that as well, which we put out there. But for instance, with that, we weren't working on primate issues, but we got information. So we went to organisations that were working, anti-vivisection groups and that sort of thing, and said, how can we use this? What can we do with it? So we helped others with it, I guess, is probably the way, as well as talking about it on TV, because we were building a relationship at the time with the media. It was vital to us. We weren't a large organisation, so as I've described, we're just a few individuals with an organisational name. But we had a very personal relationship with quite a lot of newspaper journalists and with the media. Better with ITV, probably, ITN at the time, probably than BBC, although we had one with BBC as well. And we go and talk on these things because we had the visuals and we had been there. That's what made it so different. They could say, okay, so this is happening, and you could describe it. I could describe a bird being tied to the ground and flapping crazily to try and attract wild birds so that they could net them. I mean, I could describe how it happened. I could describe the sound, the smell, the heat, everything, because I'd been there. And that was an important part of putting yourself out there on an issue.
So you're also exploiting the fact you had visuals that television and the press need.
Well, we were doing their job for them, if you think that they should have been doing that, and we did. We were providing them with free stuff most of the time. Sometimes we got some money for it occasionally when we needed it, and they were happy with that. But largely, yeah, it was absolutely... and stock material that could be used again and again and again. I mean, I was on holiday in Spain once. No, I wasn't on holiday. A friend was on holiday, that's right. And they got to an apartment somewhere in southern Spain, and they just had a shower, about to go out, and someone said, "That's Dave." And it was the telly was on. And it wasn't in the middle of the campaign, it was just something that had carried on and on and on. And we used to use WTN a lot as well, World Television News. We never got paid for any of that, but they were syndicated and put it out all over the world. So you could get that kind of story. There was very little checking back on you. In those days it was a bit easier. Later on there would be that, but how can we believe you? But this is where building up your relationship with the media was so important. So
run through some of the other big campaigns that you worked on and are proudest of.
I'm pretty proud of most of them, all of them. But certainly, I mean, the bird campaign has successes. I would say that because you said, why did you stop? I mean, we managed to get 70 airlines to stop carrying the birds, which was most of the ones. KLM was the biggest, and we managed to get them to stop. So we killed the umbilical transport cord of the trade. We also managed to use it in the US, again with Christine Stevens and her groups. And other groups to successfully get through the Wild Bird Conservation Act, which has changed things completely in that huge consuming block of the USA. Europe started to do a few more things, and animal welfare issues came into it. So that, and we also got together with the RSPB and the RSPCA, and I'm pretty proud of that actually. We had a very good little grouping there. In fact, the RSPCA helped us by funding quite a bit of what we were doing and trips and that kind of thing at the time. Because we went to Senegal, we went to Guyana, we went to Ghana, Argentina, made TV shows in Argentina that Nat Geo put out in the 90s on this issue. 22,000 pairs of African grey parrots were being caught every year legally in the Great Chaco region of northern Argentina, which is a threatened forest area, and to catch the parrots, the young parrots, they chop a tree down to get to the hole at the top. And they were chopping trees down for the parrot trade. So it was also a deforestation issue. And that went out on Nat Geo, and then they stopped it all completely. So, you know, there were great successes on it. So I wouldn't say by any means we really gave up on it. It was, we had some successes on it. It was time to move on.
And moving on.
Yeah, to other campaigns.
You moved on to other campaigns.
Well,
Run through some.
The big one that took up the latter part of the 80s for us was again coming from a meeting at a meeting of CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, and it was Christine again who'd got in some world experts for a dinner one evening, and Alan and I sat there. We were there to be working on the bird trade, and it was elephants. It was a shocking time where 70,000 or so elephants were being poached every year. It's been shocking more recently too, but it was huge then, and no one was doing anything about it. They were trying to protect what they called the quota system, which had been in play for quite a while, but it was, once we started looking into it, which was where this all went, it was riddled with holes to use actually for more profit, and it came as no surprise after 2 years of investigation undercover in the Far East and in the Middle East and in Africa. We sort of pieced the whole thing together. We started off not knowing much, which was probably quite useful because we had to start filling it in with facts and information rather than coming with some sort of vague idea of what was happening. And Alan had a friend from Greenpeace that provided another person who gave us some very interesting information at the very beginning about a boat that was smuggling ivory up from Tanzania up to Dubai, and we met with him and we discussed it and got some names of companies and that were involved from Dubai, and I was actually looking at something just the other day about what we did. I mean, on one of our trips, we followed that one up and went to the shop, which was the address that was given us, and we were with, I was with a campaigner, Susie Watts. Good team, male and female, because you can use all the prejudices of the people that you're going to see. And she was brilliant at getting these guys in the shop. It was a clothing shop, it was jeans. And so while she talked to them, we were pretending to be a recently married couple, and I kept going out the back to try the jeans on, and I nipped upstairs to see what their office looked like and all that, and she was taking the mickey out of me, you know, sort of saying, oh, he's like this, he's still trying to fit, he's never going to do it, he's trying to fit himself into a 32, it won't happen, he's been eating too much, you know, that sort of thing. And they loved it, and she said to them, oh, this table, underneath glass on the table with all these notes from different countries in Africa, and she said, oh, I said, you must travel a lot in Africa. He said, yeah, we do. She said, well, what do you do? He said, oh, we smuggle ivory. Well, that's not what you expected to hear. And so we just played on that, and they started, and it was a time, this was a bit later on in the campaign, when Dubai had said that they'd closed everything down. And he said, oh, yeah, no. She said, so where do you sell it? What do you do with it? So well, it comes up in this boat, which was the boat we'd heard about. And then we sell it to the Chinese here. They've got factories. Oh, where? And from that we found the factories in Ajman, which is another emirate, and they just moved from another one to that one. We found one in Dubai, We also found the boat, actually, although it had been sold on by that time. And we managed to look at the log of the boat and photograph the log of the boat that showed the last few years, where it had been all the way up the coast of East Africa. It all fitted in and told us that the story that we'd heard originally was really true. But prior to that, on our first investigation, we'd gone to Dubai completely not knowing how to do anything, really. And it was Alan, myself, and Clive Lonsdale, who was our cameraman at the time. And we knew that there was a factory in a free zone. This was Dubai in 1988. So it's not the Dubai that people know now, but it did have certain areas that looked very plush, and Shangri-La Hotel, that sort of stuff. But it's not as it was now. And Jebel Ali was sort of this area of a free zone out in the desert. And to get in there, we went through all kinds of ways. We went to the British Embassy party so that we could be seen as a film crew. Film crew was our cover. We went to the zone to say to them that we'd like to talk about trade and make a film about it. We got into the airport. And by getting to the airport, we saw the airway bills. We found out the companies that were shipping ivory. To get into Jebel Ali, we found the factory. We had an interesting time in the Black & Decker factory, which was the bit next to where we knew the other factory was. We said we're really interested in your products. This was just they're all in boxes. It was during Ramadan, and everything was quite quiet. It was very hot. And while Alan kept them busy talking and chatting about how interesting Black & Decker was, they put us, we said we'd like to get a shot from the top of all your factory. They put us in a box on a forklift truck, raised us onto the point we asked them to. This was Clive and myself in the box, photographer and film cameraman. We cut a hole in the box and we filmed directly over the top into the neighbouring factory. And the factory that the media had been told you'll never be able to get any video of, you'll never see it. And that was a very, very important moment, because that created, a bit later on when the campaign was launched, that footage created a bit of a scrum to try and get hold of it so we could control how it was used. And the way that we chose to use it eventually was to launch campaign. Actually, I think we might have used it in the first bit we put out. We managed to get to see Daphne Sheldrick and her rescue area where she rescued baby elephants, and we talked to her about what was happening to elephants, and she was very, very forceful about there had to be a ban. That was her personal opinion, and it was a time when nobody seemed to think that was what to do. And I think when we put out that slightly cute thing at Christmas on ITN, I think we used the footage at that, but no one knew who had got it, because we didn't want to let anyone know that EIA had been there and had done all that, because we were still holding off until we launched the campaign. Timing was crucial.
This is the nub of it, really, isn't it? That the EIA's built its reputation on the quality of its investigations, backed up by often covert filming and taking risks in order to get that material where other people wouldn't. Do you think that's really the essence of what EIA was about or is about?
Well, I think timing is crucial. And there would have been no ivory ban if there hadn't been a country that had proposed it, and nobody was about to. So yes, I mean, our footage and our knowledge that we gained about the ivory trade was probably the best knowledge that anybody in the conservation business had. The ivory trade, they had the knowledge, they knew it, and they'd been using their knowledge to hoodwink everybody for years and years and years, and prey on conservationists feeling that, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, or that sort of thing. We came in hard.
But seeing is believing.
We came in hard, but we first used our information and footage in Tanzania, not in the public domain, because we needed a country to propose the ban. And worked for a very long time, actually, backwards and forwards. Alan was in there for ages, talking to the Tanzanian Conservation Fund, Wildlife Conservation Society of Tanzania, and getting all the way up to people very close to the president. We had a guy there who was really good, who'd been moved in by the president to try and control things within the wildlife department, Costa Malai, and we gave them information of how many tons and tons and tons and tons of their ivory was heading to Dubai. And they were shocked and horrified. We helped them on one or two occasions. I travelled up to Dubai once to be quietly in the background to help one of their delegations that was there. And eventually, by providing them with a well-written, well-documented proposal, they proposed the Appendix 1 for elephants, which went to ban. And then they went to CITES to back it up, and Costa was very strong and very, So it's not just what you do with the media with it all, it's what you do with it to create the campaign. And in this case, it all came together in a triumphant success in the end of 1989. We got the ivory ban.
And you were honoured for it, of course.
Sorry? You
were honoured for it.
Oh, yes. Well, Alan and I were given the Schweitzer Medal by the Animal Welfare Institute. That was a huge honour. That was for work on the dolphins as well, and the elephants, because we'd been involved in quite a lot of research and what was going on around the world for small cetaceans. So that was that was wonderful. We were given we went to one of the big committee rooms in Washington, and we were given it by Senator Hines, who was at the time. It was wonderful.
Why did you leave EIA?
It was a gradual process. I would say I was a bit burnt out, because in '95 I stopped being the executive director. I was pretty burnt out. I mean, the year before I travelled I was away from the UK for 7 months of that year. And that doesn't include the bits before and after, getting ready to go away, coming back, and blah, blah, blah. And it had been like that for quite a while. And we just made a TV series, and I've been one of the co-producers on it for EIA, a 7-part TV series on ITV, and that was a lot of work as well as being the executive director.
That was the Eco Detectives.
Animal Detectives.
Animal Detectives.
And it was very successful. It did a lot, and we'd been paid money for it. It helped us keep going at the time, and it won a campaign or two, which was brilliant. But I was knackered, and I just didn't want to be. I like to be out there doing the stuff. I'm not so good running things in an office, although I think I did okay. And I also am quite good at moving on if I feel that's the thing to do. I don't feel that I don't fear moving on, put it that way. I spoke with Alan and Jenny about it, and we agreed I'd do some special projects. I went on to start our Tiger campaign for a couple of years. Started working with Debbie Banks, who was a volunteer at the beginning of that, and then saw how great she was and said, well, look, you get on with that. I'm going to go and work now on forestry, which is something we'd all been talking about, getting involved in. The mess in the forestry debate was so huge. The conservationists were screaming for sustainable forestry only, and the trade was saying, well, what do you mean? And we can't do that. And the definition, it was all just a mess. And we took upon the idea of let's make illegal logging the issue, because it's already got the fact it's illegal in the name. So when we started that campaign, we went to a national park that was being illegally logged, which had orangutans, which all those things rather pull the heartstrings of people around the world, and it shows you exactly what's going on and what's being destroyed. But we didn't go there in 1986. We didn't go there in 1996 or 7. We went there in 1998, and the reason we went there in 1998 was because it was the place to go, because it was obvious that the President Suharto was going to fall, and it was going to be a free-for-all, and things were going to change, and there were going to be ways that you would be able to do things differently. And sure enough, soon after our first trip there, Suharto fell, and it allowed us to do so many different things using our investigations, working with local organisations there. And I remember our first press conference in Jakarta. Press conferences in Jakarta had always been a bit like workshops. You didn't want to die because you did a press conference, so you did it all very politely. You didn't name people, you didn't, all that sort of stuff. You worked within the rules. If you were a human rights activist, you couldn't do it. If you're an environmentalist, maybe you could, because of the dictatorship of Suharto. So when that had all gone, and we did our first press conference, we had footage of trees coming down, we had footage of orangutans, we had names, we had photographs of the people we wanted to name, and all that kind of stuff. And with Telepac, who was the organisation we worked with at the time, we put together a press conference in a major part of Jakarta, and quite a few people from embassies started to turn up. We had CNN and BBC, and I don't know, everybody was, the Reuters were there, that's just the camera crews. I mean, the journalists, the local journalists, didn't know what was going on, because normally they expected to be paid to go to a press conference. And we said, no, you're not getting paid. There's a cup of coffee over there if you want one. So that lot were pretty miserable. But on the international thing, we just got, it was really the first time I think there was that kind of Western style expose press conference ever in Indonesia. And they're doing that all the time now. Locals are doing that all the time now. They've got some of the organisations that we helped train up and how to do that kind of work and get visuals and all that over the years, and that's how they do stuff there now. They come out, and we not only named names, we handed a photograph of the guy that we were focusing on to every person that turned up there and said, you can take him away with you if you like. This guy's got to go. He didn't, but it was the beginning of a long campaign that ended up achieving partly some of the goals that we were after. I mean, the main thing was that here was Europe and the USA able to import timber from other countries, even though they knew that it was illegally obtained. That's the situation it was. So I've been on telly and said, I could stand under a tree in a national park with an orangutan up the tree, and a guy can come along and he can saw that tree down, and although he'll have broken local laws, they don't do anything about it, and that timber could end up in your living room in Britain. And it's astounding and it's shocking, and people couldn't think that, but it took 13 years of that campaign to actually get legislation in the EU, and prior to that we've managed to get an amendment to an act, Lacey Act, in the US, which already existed but it didn't include timber. Managed to get that in there, so which did the same thing, and it made it illegal to import illegally sourced timber. There's a lot of problems around that, but it gave you the law.
So you gave up a desk job basically to go back into the field?
Yeah, sort of. Well, it wasn't a desk job because I was travelling. I travelled 7 months in it. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened. I just wasn't the executive director anymore, I guess. Yeah, but then the question was, why did I leave? 3 years before I left, I managed to raise a lot of money for the forest campaign. So it was set up for the next 3 years with the programme and everything else. My partner Gary was very, he got fed up. I was away too much. We weren't seeing each other. I was all worked up before I went, and when I came back, it's the same with anybody that travels a lot. You come back and you've both been living different lives. It takes a week to get into it again. It was just too much, and I said to him, yeah, I'm going to, first of all, I'll step back. So I handed over that 3-year programme and did a bit of it on a different role. I didn't like that. It wasn't going to work. And we were in a fortunate position that we felt that we could afford for me to retire. So I did.
So what do you think your legacy is or will be, Dave?
Well, I think we achieved a lot while I was there. I was a part of it. I don't believe there would have been an ivory ban. Maybe later on, maybe after a few more 100,000 elephants had died, I don't know. Don't know what they were waiting for. And I think if EIA, if Alan in particular, myself in particular, who put together all that work up to the ban, that's a big legacy. I think the forestry work, I think I moved things in a way that we hadn't really worked on before, involving the local NGO on an equal basis. I even raised the funds, and I had an argument with DFID, who wanted to give me the money and then me to hand it out to them. And I said, no, let's not do that. Let's have our separate budgets, and you pay them, not me, because I don't want to be the bank. I don't, because then it changes the whole relationship. And so we did that, and we built from that. They knew, they went out and trained 100 different NGOs with EIA's support and help, giving cameras and information, I mean, everything around there. And there you're looking at an environmental movement that's got skills from the beginning, that they can do stuff themselves, or they can feed, and they still need international support for people to stick their head up above the parapet and say things that perhaps they can't. But yeah, I think that's one of the things. I think working with the RSPCA and RSPB on the bird campaign was a friendly and useful friendliness. That's one of the things. I think when we went to Indonesia, we hadn't got a clue who we were going to work with. And when we went to see Telepac, we went to see lots of other groups too. We liked each other. They were young, they'd all graduates out of the local agricultural college in Bogor in Indonesia, and we were offering them something that they sort of thought they'd quite like to do. And then we did some trips together. On trips you get to know people very well. So there was a friendship there as well, which I think helped that succeed in the direction it went, getting the new legislation, which was what we were after, you know. And when we went, just before I left, I was in Papua, West Papua, part of Indonesia, and we went to see a tribe out in the middle of a forest who lived as forest people. They dwelled there, living off what the forest provided. The Kanawas tribe, and they were being threatened by local military, Indonesian military, who were beginning already to cut down their merbau trees in their area. And they asked for our help through Telepac. And so Telepac and EIA, and I was there. I remember being there because I had malaria a few weeks later. And we stayed with them in the village. There are moments like that you'll never forget because of the way everything went, and we won it for them as well, so that the bullying stopped and the campaign changed and moved in directions to try and stop the merbau coming out of West Papua. But there were so many moments through all this, through all those years together, that we worked together, and yeah, you know, sort of I miss that side of it. I miss that friendship, everything else. I don't particularly miss the campaigning, and certainly don't miss the conventions like CITES and IWC and all the others. I don't miss them. I'm not set up for them. But I'm having a fantastic time. So I'm not, you know. And other people are still doing it. EIA is still here. EIA is still getting on with doing, I think, its core work of what it needs to do. It still is unique in that, and I'm happy with that.
What future direction do you think EIA should go in?
I don't know what's going to happen in the world in the future, but I think getting factual information that the media and what I do know is that you never win everything completely forever. You have to keep fighting. You said you gave up the bird trade. Well, sort of did and sort of didn't, because there are lots of people working on that. There are new organisations that work on that, and that's great, and it's fantastic that that's happening. We've had to defend the ivory ban. You know, I was in Zimbabwe, tracking down the murder of a captain Nleya, to try and show how Zimbabwe was not as being honest to everybody, because Zimbabwe was trying to open up the ivory trade soon after the ban, because he had gone to government and told them that the military were involved in poaching and ivory trade through Mozambique. And he died. He was murdered. And so I went to meet his wife and photographed the diaries, and she gave me all the information about how he'd written to her and all that. He was found hanging at the back of a military barracks up near Rangi National Park. We were followed during all of that, nasty little moments like that. But we've had to hold all these things back and stop the other side coming and changing it all around again. And in that, sadly, well, we didn't fail, but the world failed when they allowed the sales of stockpiles in the in 2008, because that then started the poaching all over again. And I think now, I hope now, most organisations and most nations understand how it works. That you open up a bit of legal trade and you've had it, and we've got a ban in China now, which is a very important part of it, which has moved things forward. But things are changing all the time, so I don't know what the future should be, but I think the key part of EIA helping others do what they do, I think it's now one of the core things that EIA does, but doing the investigations, putting together the reports, getting the tools that you need to run a campaign, whether it's video or whether it's somebody that knows how to run social media nowadays, and all that sort of stuff, to a campaign advantage. It's still a very necessary part of the whole environmental movement. So I think it should keep going in that direction, but be open enough to use new things that are coming its way.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't have any regrets. I don't regret many things ever, really. I take responsibility for what I've done, and it was how I did it at the time, whatever it was. So no, I'm not a regretful person in any way. I think it was a fantastic, for my life, I can't believe how rich it's been, and EIA has been a very large part of that. I feel we achieved an awful lot. And I learned early on, I think, I suppose Norway was part of that, but then certainly the ivory trade work, and the bird stuff, actually, that once you've got a taste of being able to change things the way you believe they should go, you can't really stop. I mean, I did stop, but I sort of didn't stop. I mean, my heart is still there. I've done bits and bobs since then. But it's no, I haven't got any regrets. I think EIA has been an amazing. The one thing I hated about EIA all the time, but I'd have hated it about any organisation, is spending so much time trying to raise the money to do the work. It's as simple as that, really. But if you've got fundraisers who can do that, that's great. But it's hard. It's hard because we never ever were sort of wasting our money all over the place. I mean, far from it. In fact, the first ivory investigations, we managed to get a corporate Amex card so we could do it with debt all the time until then try and raise the money afterwards, because there were timings in it that were so necessary.
Okay. I think you've encapsulated it all. Is there anything else you would like to say that we've missed out on?
Well, I suppose. No, I mean, we've gone from 3 people to an awful lot more. Those 3 people that started it still have at the centre of their heart the desire to see the world treat the environment very much better, which is amazing that we still feel, we put ourselves into it all, we've gone through all that, we've got, and from that, we've had many people go through the door, worked with us, wonderful people. Some of them have gone on to set up the most extraordinarily wonderful organisations doing fantastic things themselves, like Global Witness and Wild Aid and Environmental Justice Foundation. There's so many of them out there. There are people that I've worked with over the years who are in some of the top positions in many of the organisations around the world now. We didn't go out to train people, but it certainly seems that we've helped many people spread out and do their own thing, and that's always been a strength of EIA, to not hold people back, to try and say, look, if you want to go and you want to do something, on some occasions to even help them do that. It's another thing that I think the three of us should be very proud of, and those other organisations that are working so hard out there to change things.
Let me say that I think the organisation is very proud of you and what you've done. And on behalf of them and everybody else and all the people you've worked for, and I've got young kids and I'm thanking you on their behalf for everything that you've done as an environmental campaigner over the years. What astonishing career you've had and what amazing achievements. And just a very big thank you from us all. And I don't know how many people say that to you, Dave, but you know, you've moved the wheel on, and very few people in the world do that. So thank you.